In response, this is the Instant Speed podcast brought to you by Red Riot Games. If you want to support the podcast, you can check out Red Riot Games in the link in the description of this video. Now, before we get to our wonderful guest, Matt Kozmor, we do have to hit you with the facts. So here they are. Now, this is a special kind of mashed together episode because we actually originally recorded this on Monday afternoon. And after recording it, we got hit with the banned and restricted news. So this might seem a little bit stitched together because we did revisit part of the news. So if you feel like some of the discussion might be a little outdated, keep in mind that there are pieces that are going to validate what we're talking about. Nonetheless, speaking of that news, being the banned and restricted announcement, which was released late night here on the East Coast of North America, basically Seeds of Agony in all ways, shapes, and forms, colors, and facets is banned in Blitz and banned in Classic Constructed, as well as, surprise, surprise, Duskblade, before it even hits the ground running, is already banned out of Classic Constructed. So, feel bad if you sort of pull it out of a pack. Nonetheless, still, it's a nice card to look at, play in Blitz. Either way, Seeds of Agony off the table, Duskblade is out for CC. Tales of Aria, however, the pre-release is already in the books, so if you have not got your cards yet from that, well, you can go ahead and check any of social media, including FabTCG on Twitter. They've posted some significantly awesome pulls, including a double Fable and double Legendary pool in a small pre-release event, which was pretty damn cool to see. Vegas is also history now, as the calling in Vegas, won by Tyler Horsepool, is out. It's done. It's over. It's in the books, ladies and gentlemen. But there are more calling events coming around. So mark your calendars. Dallas Fort Worth is happening October 15th to the 17th. You've got Cincinnati, October 22nd through the 24th. And Orlando, which is special because Orlando is also the Nationals, is going to be occurring at the Orlando Calling as well. And that's happening November 5th through till November 7th. So we've got some ban restrictions. We've got all kinds of other stuff. We're going to be diving deep into the numbers of what's moving forward, including the Living Legend system. Here's your update on that. Chane, 402 points, sitting atop the Living Legend system with 402 Living Legend points, followed by Katsu at 274. So these are some numbers that we want to dive into, and who better to dive into these than with Matt Kozmor, aka Kozmic. He is your statistician here in the Flesh and Blood community, and we're going to be talking with him right now. The Instant Speed podcast is very happy to welcome the winner of the Road to Nationals at Upkeep Games in Howell, Michigan, the maestro of math. He's nimble with numbers, Matt Kozmor, aka Kozmic, who has basically been treating the Flesh and Blood community with these wonderful graphics that we'll throw up on screen for you to take a look at. Here's a little peek for you guys right now. We'll dive into a little bit later. You guys can go further into the numbers, but basically he has been the stats guy for not only Flesh and Blood, but for some other games as well. Welcome, Matt Kozmor. Kozmic, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate being here.
Awesome. So the first thing that we like to do, obviously, is the fact that a lot of people will know who you are. Obviously, they've already digested your content. It's out there. Now, the face behind the numbers, that's what we want to get into. But who is the Matt Kozmor? What is the origin story for Kozmic coming up to Flesh and Blood? A lot of players in Flesh and Blood obviously have a background in CCGs, and that's what I always like to dig into because not gonna, we're not... No secrets here. You and I are not young bucks. We're not spring chickens. We have some history when it comes to CCGs. So where did you start this trek that ended up now in Flesh and Blood?
So I think for a lot of people, I started with Magic the Gathering way back in the day, 20 plus years ago now for forever, right? And I did that for a while. I did like PTQs, played in states, local events, stuff like that. But really the turning point for me is when a card game called Force of Will came out. And I've been doing content for various CCGs over the last 7 years. So, retired grinder, as I like to say, from the more competitive side. But I have to admit, I really do love Flesh and Blood. I went to Vegas, played it. And I've been helping some stores get set up. It's just been a really good time to get back into a card game. Obviously, with COVID and whatnot, just good to see people again, safely, of course. and just get out there and play some card games again. So yeah, I mean, Force of Will, Final Fantasy TCG. Basically, I played over a dozen various card games, especially over the last 7 years. I've been doing content for, and now I've been playing Flesh and Blood for, wow, only 2 months. Now that I actually look at my calendar, it's only been 2 months I've been playing Flesh and Blood. So still relatively new, all things considered.
Which is fascinating too, right? Because when you kind of look back on it, the amount of time and investment that I have given to this game, that you have given to this game, that a lot of people have given to this game, in retrospect, when you're really weighing it against everything else that you have put your time into, it really amounts to just a few months. I mean, there have been some of the OGs who have been with the game since its inception from way back when, but there is no there is no sort of PTR for this. There's no alpha. There's no, key that you have to input into Steam or something to unlock it to get access to it early, right? Like some early access kind of, that doesn't exist with something that is just purely paper-based, which is fascinating for us. Because so when we actually look into this, I mean, you can count the significant amount of hours that you and I, especially you, have just donated to this game. And ultimately, when all said and done, the actual calendar months that have passed are not many. And it's amazing how it has already just kind of consumed our life to that degree.
And one thing I do appreciate, again, coming from Force Will, coming from Final Fantasy, usually I'm the person that I'm going to locals, I'm hosting demo days, and there's like 1 or 2 people that show up, and you grow from there, right? And a lot of people have already done that for this game. I actually fell into a really great play group that's 5 minutes from my place, so feel very lucky for that. But it really shows the love that's gone into this game already just from a local scene. And it's been very difficult for people to get together, and with COVID and shops very slowly opening back up. But I was legitimately surprised to see how much support there already is for this game. And now one of the locals I play at, they get like 30 players weekly for a Thursday night meetup. And I would have loved to have that in all my time with Force of Will or Final Fantasy or insert other card game here. So maybe I'm in a hot spot. Maybe I'm just lucky, but I've been really impressed by the local dedication that's already popped up for this game. And, it's 2 years, but that 2 years with, organized play just starting off, local shops getting set up, it sounds like a lot of time, but it's really not. I very much view this game as being very young still from a maturity standpoint in the local scene that's been brought up. So again, if you've been out there, if you've been going to your locals, getting demo days and stuff like that together, kudos to you, because you all have done a great job on the game so far.
And it's just growing. And that's the wonderful thing about it as well, is the fact that every time I go to an event, be it a sealed event or just a CC event or something, there's always somebody, either a new face, or there are people who are interested and come in and just want to watch or just want to inquire about what's going on. But it just seems like for us who have been here from in the CCG landscape way back when, in the late 90s through till now, the fact that there was just paper at the time, and now that it's reverting back to this sort of paper format, which is nice, and as convenient as the digital media can be, as the fact that you can just bust out your phone and jam a few games of, be it Magic or Hearthstone or Runeterra or whatever. The convenience of it is great. Don't get me wrong, but there just is this unmatched feeling of being able to look forward to a particular time on a particular day to attend an event, to jam cards with people. And, so I definitely echo that. But what I want to get into for you specifically is the fact that you have created this, I don't want to say this spotlight on the fact that you just expose the game from a statistical standpoint in very important areas, especially when it comes to these RTN weekly updates, these RTN week 1 through 6 that you've released on the regular, to basically expose the power levels or the play rates, rather, the conversion rates of some of these heroes. And where did this this interest in statistics when it comes to CCGs originate from? Where did that spawn?
For sure. And I do got to give a proper shout out to Tower Number 9, because they're the main one collecting all the data. I'm just the one that puts together pretty images. And now it's, we've been talking to Discord just in passing, and they've been doing a lot of great work. So again, huge shout out to them. But for me, I've been in an analytical role for 12 years now, and it's been market research, it's been voice of customer, it's been a lot of different variations of it. But I just love being able to tell a story with data and see how trends go. Part of the excitement for me is just saying, okay, well, if deck A is doing well this week and 20% of people are playing it, what does the counter look like? What's the percentage of people who can play something else, and maybe it brings it down? So it's really more of like the metagaming and predicting nature that's tied behind it. So part of it's my, real life work that carries over. And then, with the stuff I've been doing for Legends of Runeterra, it was really great to have the digital card game where you have so much more data available to you and you can really do a lot more with it. Where in Flesh and Blood, it's still a very young game. We don't have a lot of, we don't have that like MTG Goldfish level of data collection, or even just here's what made top 8 at a 30-person local, right? Which, is not the highest tier of competitive play. It doesn't always need to be so cutthroat, but it still gives you really good information. Like one thing I still think that's maybe unexplored quite a bit is Leviathan, for instance. Just it got very little to no play for the majority of the RTN season, and I think we've been not getting as much commitment to it in terms of a deck building and refinement standpoint that it might actually be decent. Am I saying it's going to be tier 0? It's going to be the next monster to beat next week? Probably not. But is it maybe slightly better than what a lot of people are giving it credit for? Absolutely. And I think that's where data can definitely help us out, again, if it's available. And we are in the magazine meta, as Blevins, shout out to him, called it, where we don't have that the age of digital information where we have the MTG Goldfish, the MTG Top 8s, all that of resource. So it's very much so-and-so did well on Discord, here's their list, try this out. And it's been interesting. It's a very different dynamic that I'm used to from a stats perspective, coming from Legends of Runeterra now into Flesh and Blood.
Yeah, it's essentially transcended to a degree of almost a little bit old school, where it has been a situation where I've noticed that, just in the Discords that you and I share, a lot of it is like, here's what has been successful, like literally yesterday. Let's dive into this. Let's dissect this. It's not just a matter of this, like you mentioned, this massive data collection and regurgitation of, play rates that are just accessible on instantaneously, right? It's something where you kind of have to be intuitive. You have to have your finger on the pulse to a degree, where you have to figure out and be, have this kind of, gumshoe mentality of you have to sniff out what the new metas are. You have to do a little bit of investigating to figure that out. And this is a little bit ode to how it used to be, right? Where you had to kind of be, if you had something brewing, you had to be secretive about it, and you can't let people sort of clue into what your advantage is in certain cases, because they will exploit it. And now what you have done, and like you said, even though it's a little bit more on the macroscopic level, and it's just a little bit more, it's not as much as a deep dive into the pure statistics of it, because just given the fact that it's a paper game, there's not much actual data to be collected. What you have done essentially has put a spotlight on some of the bigger issues that are in fact being presented by the things like play rates of certain heroes, conversion rates, success rates of heroes. And I want to dig into that, because the obvious winner in what you keep presenting week in and week out is the fact that Chane is just one of the most powerful heroes, obviously, that's out there. And I want to ask you first and foremost, this is not to do with statistics, but why you feel Chane is performing so well to the degree that his numbers are so dominant in every single one of these graphics that you put out.
Sure. And, being younger to the game myself, I by no means am going to present myself to be an expert on it, but within Flesh and Blood, there's a very finite limit of saying that, okay, I have a 4-card hand, I'm going to block with some cards, and that's going to reduce the resources available to me on the next turn. Chane just gets a second hand for basically free. And yes, there's a deck building cost to it, which is very, very low, all things considered. So Chane puts himself in a spot where it says, okay, well, I can block with 3 cards if I really want to, keep a blue in my hand, and probably play everything that I care about out of my blood debt. So you just get all this access to what's effectively a second hand that no other hero can do. And I would say that's, criminal offense number 1. And then beyond that, just with the soul shackle, is you're just getting an extra action very easily. Yes, it does have to be a rune blade, right, or shadow that's getting the benefit, but you need to make sure that you're sequencing in a way that you're still getting an extra action than that 90% of the other heroes don't. And I have to say, just for my limited time of working with the new Tails heroes and trying to be excited for like Lexi and stuff, you really miss that extra, go again. Now, if you're using her new Majestic, you get it that way. But if you're trying to do some, some cheeky stuff with maybe Shiver, it's really difficult. And you really start to appreciate just how strong Chane is because of the extra action, basically extra action point for free and the second hand for free. And yes, there is the drawback of you're milling yourself quicker, but generally speaking, the games are going to be over by Shackle 4, 5, or 6 anyways. it doesn't really matter. You're not going to go through your whole deck. And, there's a fatigue strategy. We can elaborate on that later. But Chane really does kind of break the more traditional rules of the game that I think a lot of players have been brought up on. And if we look at things of like the Bravo and the Katsu, especially where they start with Welcome to Wraith and what have you, he's just literally at a different level. And I think that's, the main reason why we saw him perform so well, not only in the RTN, but if you look at the day 2 conversions for Vegas, even though unfortunately he didn't win, Chane is kind of still the elephant in the room going into this next meta that needs to be addressed in one way or another. And we'll see if that happens.
No, and one of the things that you definitely hit on is the fact that the Soul Shackling giving a go again. I mean, as somebody myself who is a Katsu main who just basically plays mostly Katsu in CC in Blitz, having those ninja effects that allow the go again, playing in these Tales of Aria pre-releases where you're just like, I only get one attack, and then what the hell am I supposed to do with these other cards? I guess I block, but that seems weird. Like I want to go face, I want to go wide, I want to push damage, and it's something that Chane can do excessively well, especially like we said. I can expend 2 to 3 cards to defend, keep a blue, and still have a chain of 3 or 4 attacks that are each sort of picking away, scratching away, and it's only going to get worse as it goes. The elephant in the room being that Chane, has had 5 decks in the top 8. I think it's a little smoke and mirrors at the fact that a Prism won here, because the fact remains that Chane is still, by and large, the best hero in the game, and the fact that 5 out of 8, the conversion rate of something like, what was it, like 40 some odd percent, 42 or 44% of the actual day 2 decks were Chane. Was that correct?
Yeah, it was like 42 or 43. I think it was low 40s, but enough, right? more than enough to cause concern. And
so with these statistics that are out there now, just these sheer numbers, you've dealt with numbers so long, and I'm curious, can stats like these essentially sway the interest in either playing a hero or not playing a hero? The people who are kind of just not necessarily knee deep in the game, but are kind of scratching the surface and want to get more involved and play a little bit more competitively, when they see this, there's 2 ways that you can kind of look at it. You can look at it and say, well, I'm seeing that 42 or 43% of day 2 were Chane decks. It's like effectively almost half of the decks made it to day 2 were Chane. Over half made it to the top 8. So either I'm playing this or I'm not playing at all, because what is my potential to actually be successful in the game? So there's an adverse effect here, because you could think about it from a perspective of, well, I know what I'm going to be facing. I can tech against it. But at the same time, you're looking at this and saying, what chance do I have because it's so successful? Could there possibly be a detriment for players who are, evaluating statistics like this, who are thinking about becoming competitive and might get turned off, or on the flip side, might actually be a little bit more inclined to join it, knowing that there's a very successful deck that they can just jump into?
Yes, it's absolutely a double-edged sword in this case. So there's always 2 different lenses that I like to look at this. One's always going to be cost. So Chane, of course, is being one of the most expensive, or is the most expensive deck in the format, I'm pretty sure, because the thing has a full suite of Command and Conquers, the full suite of Art of Wars, or this full suite of Enlightened Strikes, which I always refer to as the terrible trio, just because of their upfront cost, let alone, running some of the most expensive equipment in the game. So from a price standpoint, you're going to have people that say, okay, that's just way too much for me to spend on, we're talking modern MTG prices for Magic people out there, right? Lower end of modern, but a good sum of money. So some people will look at that and say, okay, it is winning, but it is twice or even 3 times more expensive than, say, Dash, I think, is still on the lower end, or like Bravo, now that those tectonic plating prices have come back down, right? There's other decks that you can get into, at least, start off in the game, that have had some moderate RTN and success in Vegas, right? There was a Dash that was 7-0, primarily as like the big call out there, right? So in these bigger events, you can do well, at least get to day 2. And then, of course, it's going to be a little bit of a matchup RNG and how well you play going beyond that. So I think price is definitely one big factor. And then you always have people who look at the meta from 2 different lenses. You either want people who are going to have, the top deck being only 10% of the meta, so you're always going to just face a slew of decks, or there are people who say, okay, I want the number 1 deck to be like 40% of the meta because I know exactly what to expect going into it. It makes my sideboarding very narrow, very easy to figure out. And things like, hey, I don't have to worry about Kano, so let's just remove all that arcane barrier. Surprise, that's a great time for Kano to come back. But he's very hard to play, which is why a lot of people don't play him. But you can throw all that arcane barrier aside and say, okay, my sideboard is so refined and perfect. I know exactly what I want to use in these sideboard slots, where if you have 10 different decks making up 10% of the meta, you really then lose kind of that agency in it, where you feel like, okay, well, I faced, the wrong 5 decks in the meta. I planned for, the let's say set A versus set B, each one's 5 decks. I planned for set A. My sideboard was all the way dedicated to that, and I played nothing but, side B, and I lost because of it. And, in card games, that's just how it is sometimes. You get matchup RNG, you're going to hit those bad matchups, and it sucks, but, you have that like 20-80, right? That maybe you win, maybe you feel great about it, but more often than not, you're going to lose those matches just because you're unfavored for X, Y, or Z reason. To bring it to flesh and blood terms, right, we can think about Arg Smash, right? If you're a brute player, you love Arg Smash, you get to go up against nothing but mechanologists, right? You just high roll all day, feels good. But maybe you didn't have any arcane barrier slots, and you go against Kano 5 rounds in a row, right? Unlikely, but just give you the both ends of that spectrum. That can really sway their opinion as well. So if it's not price, I definitely think it comes down to what does the meta look like. Different people are going to have different restrictions on what gets them into the game or keeps them out of the game in some cases, right? And it's just up to the individual to decide from that point on.
Yeah, it's like that's basically, you have the matchup RNG as well, right? That'll sort of factor into it. Just like all the RTNs that I attended and sideboarding for the millions of prisms apparently that were in my area that I never queued into because I was unlucky in that sense. But it happens, but don't worry about it. I got my fair share of chains. So literally the 44%, I got to absorb most of that. But there is a built-in sort of safety net system here for these runaway trains like Chane, essentially, who are continuously winning and winning big and winning tournaments, etc. It's a living legend point system where essentially the more you win, eventually you just reach the top of the peak and you fall off. And in this case, nobody is anywhere in the stratosphere of where Chane's at. It was at 402, I believe, was the most recent update a couple days ago. 402 Living Legends points for Chane. The second would be Katsu at 274. Now you need 1,000 of these bad boys to get banned, essentially, from legal tournament play. He's not halfway there yet, but he has been a mainstay for so long. How likely is it now that he's going to get banned anytime soon, given that there's new heroes coming out? Is he still powerful enough to be a nuisance? But probably in check, like with Tales of Aria, with these frostbites and such, these stopping style heroes, these slowdown control related heroes, is that good enough to keep him in check, or does he need perhaps to be pushed to living legend status to finally be curtailed?
So this is going to be a very dangerous area that we're entering into. And I know there's a lot of hype around Tails, and I know that there's a lot of, let's go with Frostbite and all the things. But if we look at the bigger picture, Chane is still going to have a good matchup in every other hero that we've had at this point in time. The downside of this is if we look at Lexi, if we look at like an ice-dominated build, if we think about the Channel Lake Frigid, if we think about, I think it's like Winter's Bite, the one that gives them a bunch of Frostbite tokens, if you line those up on critical terms against Chane, Shekel 4, Shekel 5, Shekel 6, they are going to bleed out. So that is going to be a very challenging board state to navigate. And both, obviously, the deck building needs to be done with Lexi first. And is Ice Lexi good in the rest of the meta? We have no idea, but at least on paper, and at least from a theory discussion standpoint, there are a lot of tools in Ice that can help slow Chane down or just punish him for all of his blood debt. Now, Chane may be able to adapt. That's a different discussion, but at least from a yes, Ice is going to be good, but what does that look like for the rest of the format? So we find ourselves in a potential position where it's going to be Chane versus Lexi versus whatever other heroes people want to play. And I would argue that's not exactly the best and most healthy of metas to have when you have these two decks that are just going to be going, head to head against one another, making up a large meta share. And then it's just a sprinkling of everything else. So I'm a little bit worried about the Living Legend point system and what it, shakes out to be. And of course, this is, the week of Tales that we're recording this and doing this, live and all that good stuff. So we'll see how well this ages. But I have to be honest, I am a little bit worried, very much worried about where Chane ends up. Again, it could be 6 months, it could be a year from now, right? We have no idea what that looks like from a timing perspective. It's going to be interesting.
Yeah,
at least.
It seems like Chane has always been out there as kind of like the fire Pokemon, and just amidst a sea of like grass Pokemon that just gets absolutely. And finally, they printed like the water Pokemon to stop it. But it's not like that one answer is going to be productive against everyone else. So you do have this sort of you do have this stopper for what Chane could potentially do, and it might be successful. But if that just becomes this rock paper scissors situation where these two will butt heads and it will be tough for them to deal with, but if that becomes the majority of it, that might make for a very problematic meta where you might feel like you are shoehorned into playing what just counters Chane, playing Chane itself and hoping that you might get more matchups against the standard meta that has already existed, or you play what you're used to and you're playing what you're comfortable with and hope that you dodge some of those Chane matchups that have always been essentially haunting you forever. So like you mentioned, this is being recorded between the pre-releases and the actual full release, so there's no CC events out there. There's not really much going on. A lot of this is essentially going to pan out over some of the future. There's Dallas Fort Worth calling October 15th, 17th. There's a bunch of national events that are coming up as well. So there's going to be big events where all this stuff is essentially going to be pushed to the forefront, right? Where we're going to figure out, the bigger brains are going to essentially let this happen for us. I mean, are there any surprises that you're anticipating moving forward? I mean, given that the new cards are coming out, like you mentioned, there is a lot of frostbite things. The things like Channel Lake Frigid, etc., can be a real nuisance for those go agains, those go wides that are going to have to really get taxed hard on paying for otherwise free cards.
So I think the big one for me that a lot of people are, I shouldn't say missing, I'm just maybe not seeing a lot of discussion around, is I really like the idea of a more aggressive Old Him strategy, if only because we have so much disruption that's available, both in his, Oaken Old is just an absolute beating, as I found out in Limited. Card's great, absolute gas. But then, beyond that, we have all these other just good ice and earth cards that can lend to a more aggressive build. And again, he doesn't need to crush like Bravo. He just needs to hit for his cards to gain their effect. So, we'll look at those on hit for disruption. And then if we add in stuff like pummels on top of it, which, of course, why not? I think Old Him can actually have some more aggressive strategies. And I definitely think that's a build option that needs to be explored more, because what I'm definitely worried about for a lot of people, there's a lot of cards that make you want to go defensive Old Him. Obviously, his hero ability, right, leans to that. But you don't want to draw in this game. And drawing in this game is, basically the double loss. It's not good. So I'm really curious to see how that shakes out. I think Lexi is a good control. Well, I should say possible control deck. We have no idea how it's going to pan out. Right. All of her effects need to hit. They need to be more aggressive in nature. So it's more of this like Death and Taxes style of play where you just get all these board state effects. They can get chip in hits. That'll give you frostbite tokens, things of that nature, where Old Him is just like, oh, I'm going to swing with a hammer for 4 and maybe get a frostbite token, right? It's a very slow and painful death that's going to lead to a lot of draws. So I'm really curious to see where Ice shakes out. But I really think that there's an aggressive Old Him strategy that can really come to the forefront of just, let's go, let's make these games be short. And also that can be a good way to punish Chane that we've seen, right? So maybe those more racing strategies have worked out in the past. Now maybe we sprinkle a little bit of ice disruption. Maybe that's good enough. We have to wait and see what that matchup looks like in a Chane. And I know I'll be building it, so I'll hopefully be able to report back on that, in a couple weeks' time. But we have the PTI side events in Cincy and Dallas that are going to be classic constructed. Again, shout out to Upkeep Games is going to have a 2K on October 2nd, I believe it is, whatever that first weekend is. So there are some classic constructed events that are coming up, and I think it's going to take maybe a little bit of time to get the word out there. I'm sure the Dice Jar will be doing something as well, but I think we will be seeing some new meta, the start of a new meta forming here, within the next 2 to 3 weeks, and we'll just have to see how it shapes out from there.
So in which case, if this is the case where, let's say, this ice strategy actually pans out and Chane kind of gets reined in a little bit and is no longer terrorizing, does that just kind of negate the importance or the impact of something like the Living Legend ban system? Because Chane essentially dominated for months, and dominating is kind of, even to a degree, an understatement. It was the focal point of most people's competitive aspirations, is just you start with Chane and then you go from there. I know there's a lot of people like you and I remember when we introduced Admirable to the game and Admirable was playing, the first thing he wanted to do was play Wizard, and he wanted to play some Kano, and he tried it, and eventually it just came down to the point where he played against Chane and saw what Chane can do, and he was just like, why the hell would you ever play anything else? Like, it was just in his very straightforward, operate on logic mind, he just went full stop and said, this is stupid, this is overpowered, let's just ride this train to the last station until it gets dealt with. But if that's the case, if the brakes have now been pumped on Chane, is this Living Legend system of getting to 1,000 good enough? Because we just lived through it, and despite the fact that it was 44% of day 2, it was 5 out of 8 top 8 decks at Calling Vegas. It was all over the place like this plague. Yet it didn't even get halfway to Living Legend. So another set comes in, kind of curtails it, but we had to live through that long, arduous winter, that nuclear winter of what this deck had over us, like covering over us, haunting us, and we never even got halfway to Living Legend status. Does it need to get revised?
Well, I think we mean to say is Hot Boy Summer, because Chane's not wearing his shirt, so he's ready to get out there and show the world who's boss. But I do want to give some credit to LSS, or maybe this giant disclaimer that we'll add up front, right? This is the first, and they've already revised it once. This is the first real test that we're getting of the Living Legend system. And I think the greatest reason the greatest showcase of why it's a failure, and I just mean that in the sense of it's not working in its current form, is that Chane got actual 0 points for Vegas. And that enough is for me to like pump the brakes and say, okay, we really need to reevaluate this. Prism, who had the worst showing, now I think back to my graphic, for top 8 to finishes, now Prism has 100 points that basically just got tossed into the garbage, and not to discredit who won and all that stuff, but basically those points got thrown away and are meaningless. So because Prism's not going to get Living Legend by any stretch anytime soon. So I think this gives us the case of, okay, well, first point still gets 100, or first place gets 100 points. Sure. What about second, third, and fourth? Maybe we give it to top 8, right? Maybe it goes down to like 20 points if you make top 8, 50 points if you make top 4, something like that, right? There needs to be another look at the Living Legend system. I think it is very much flawed in its current instance. But again, we only had the Road to Nationals as like our main focus point. We've had one calling that's going to be classic constructed, and it falls off from there. And then it's nothing till National. So it's yes, we can all recognize that Chane is too much of a problem, or too strong a force that's creating a problem with Vegas, again, being the 40% or whatever it was. And then also the other side of it is like, we just haven't had the competitive events line up in a good way to really evaluate the Living Legend system. I think everyone can agree that what the hell happened in Vegas in terms of a point standpoint, and Chane 0. But from there, it's saying, okay, well, Chane's an issue, but LSS needs to look at it again. It's like, where do you think they should go from there at that point?
It's incredible that, especially when you mentioned the fact that like Chane got 0 Living Legend points out of that, and someone like Prism, who again, that was another point that I wanted to tap on, is the fact that of those statistics that you present, those graphics that you go ahead and publish, is the fact that Prism has the worst conversion rate. It has a pretty healthy showing in the top 8, but in terms of actually converting that to wins, it has the worst conversion percentage of anyone else out there, and that's telling, given the fact that, okay, great, Tyler Horspool did a masterful job with that list and piloted it like an absolute pro to go ahead and win the Calling Las Vegas. And what do they get out of it? Well, thanks Tyler, Chane got 0 Living Legend points. Like, way to go. He's actually our guest on episode 3, so we're very excited about that. So I will lambaste him for that right there. But nonetheless, like, I think you're right about this. It is a flawed system, given the fact that there is so much runway given to these heroes to overperform, that even in situations where they just fall short, I don't know if you're a baseball fan at all, but somebody like Mike Trout, who is arguably one of the greatest baseball players ever, who rarely wins MVPs, but he is argued as the best of the past God knows how many years. But he just always comes up second. And when it comes down to it, it's hard to say. He's like, well, how can you consider him the greatest? He never wins MVPs. His stats are always better than everyone else's. He performs in the regular season like crazy. He's better than everyone else overall, but he just never wins. He's never in the playoffs. He never wins a championship. It's just like one of those things. And in this case, with Prism, it's like, all right, here's your points. Like, have fun, go invest them in GameStop or something, because you're not going to get much higher than that. So fascinating mechanic or system here with the Living Legend points. But I think you're right. I think it needs to get looked at, because there's no way that 1,000 points is enough, because in that span, they might print new heroes, which might just slow down other heroes that are approaching the Living Legend status. But that doesn't take away from the pain that we have to live through of this dominance of one hero just running the table for so long.
Yeah, and he's definitely not going anywhere either, right? People have invested that money into the deck. They are going to play at their locals. They're going to play it at, the side events that are coming and calling. So I know some people might have some wishful thinking that Chane's just going to disappear as people gravitate towards new heroes, but I think that's not true. I think we'll definitely see Chane being a very large representation of the meta. The new meta that starts in less than a week, but he'll still be there for sure.
That's right. We are recording this currently on Monday, September 20th. So we just came out fresh from Tales of Aria pre-releases. I had a great time. I realized that in a meta where there is no arcane defense, playing Briar is just a easy way to just sort of score some wins on some unsuspecting opponents. How was your experience with the pre-release moving forward? I saw you sharing some of the sweet pulls that you picked up.
Yep, I opened a new horizon. I went to 3 events, so that's always good. I got my money back clearly from the pre-release, but yeah, I tried to force Lexi in one of them. I went 2-2, just felt very meh. Old Him, so I guess back in Vegas, I went 5-1 with Old Him, just dominates really good. And then I played Briar in the last 2, and I'm just like, Briar with even just an average pool, if you get like the Inspire Lightning or whatever it's called again, one that's just free 3 arcane damage off the red for a fusion. I'm like, you're at 20 life. This is literally a lightning bolt. Like, this is insanely strong in a sealed pool. So sure. And then you add on like Ball of Lightnings to that too. So I'm really curious. A lot of us are going to be getting together, doing some sealed practice, talking through sealed pools and whatnot as we get ready for. I'll be going to Cincy, so see you all there if you're going. But it's like Briar is so strong from just a basic level pool, but we've only played a handful of events. Maybe we've missed stuff off of maybe Lexi's actually really good, right? So there's a lot of, I'm looking forward to the theory crafting and really looking at some sealed pools. And, of course, some of it's always going to be, you got to open the right cards. But I think there's a lot of skill in Limited, and I've really been coming around to it, in the last, I guess, 3 weeks, really, worth of time that I've invested into it. But yeah, my pre-release was great. It's always a celebration of the new set and getting excited for new heroes. So it helps I open well, but it's really just great to see people come out and play.
Yeah, the good pulls are always going to help out. I was just across from somebody who opened a Crown of Seeds, which was great. I pulled a cold foil on my own, like a bunch of Majestics. It was a good feeling just all together. Again, opening packs. The packs felt different this time too, which was really cool, actually. They felt robust. They really felt like I was holding something special. Yeah, new cards are always great. And you're mentioning that you're going to Cincinnati, which is the Cincinnati Calling on October 22nd through to 24th. Now, the other question for you, you have won a Road to Nationals. Your competitive, fire that burns inside of you. I don't know when that, if that has sort of been resparked with Flesh and Blood, or where that originated from. You mentioned to me, I know that you have played Magic relatively competitively in the past. When did that taper off, and when did that competitive fire sort of pick up again?
So for me, it was the transition that I made from a Magic grinder doing all that stuff, and then Forcible came out, and I just flat out just stopped. I don't have like a good, reason for it, other than I just like, hey, I'm going to go try to do content for a little bit. And I was able to grow a community through that. And for those that know, I was the head judge for the first year and a half of the game. So I traveled for the big events. And it was just really great to help grow a game and see people come out and appreciate, putting on the events, seeing where people come from. Like, the main thing that keeps me in card games and why I've been doing it for so long is I just love talking to other people and seeing what their, past experiences were. So with content creation, it's been a great way just to get out there and talk to people, help build locals. And that's why I'm going to hopefully, knock on wood, we're going to revive the YouTube channel for the umpteenth time, try to do some Flesh and Blood content. But I've really enjoyed, and I don't know what it's been. I don't have like one good event. Like, I'll go play at events, right? Like, I'm going to Cincy. I went to Vegas. Like, I just enjoy traveling these events and doing well. But now I'm like, holy shit, I qualified for nationals. Like, I kind of have to care, I think. Like, I feel like I'd be doing, a dishonest or like slapping people in the face if I didn't go to nationals and give it my all now. Because, I've had success in the past with other card games. Now it's like, oh shit, I might actually be, knock on wood, I've been doing well. And maybe it's beginner's luck, call it, what you will. But in 2 months, I've been doing pretty well. And like, I've really started to understand more of Flesh and Blood. And I just really appreciate the game, because like, once you get into like the really nuanced stuff of like pitch stacking and understanding, like, okay, well, obviously your Chane, you have to pitch stack, but like paying attention to what your opponent's pitching and seeing like where that's going to come back up in the game. Like, I've really enjoyed the next level complexity that Flesh and Blood offers. And I think it is a really good game at, from a competitive standpoint, wanting people to balance issues aside, small disclaimer, it's a good competitive game to get people out there. And, you always can do something with your hand. There's no land screw. There's no like, oh my God, I guess there are some cases like, oh, I didn't draw an attack if you're a Runeblade hero, because you have to have like 50% attack, 50% non-attack actions. But mostly there's always something to do with your hand. So I just like the feeling that there's always something to do in the game. And there's always a way to navigate those, even if it's best of one, there's always a way to navigate those matches to really feel like you've done something that game. And Flesh and Blood is just, it's a good game. I guess that's really what it comes back to, and why I've, sparked the competitive interest. So yeah, hopefully going to Cincy, hopefully going to Nationals, we'll see, how everything goes with COVID and all that good stuff. But really going to try to, first and foremost, spend some time at locals, help them get recording set up, help bolster the local scene. And then after that, yeah, I'm very much back on my grind of wanting to play competitively again.
Well, we look forward to it again. Your YouTube channel, your content in general is always top notch, Maddie. It's always great, Kozmic, to be here with you and to talk about this. We do have another segment around the corner. It's called Go Again. We're going to just kind of rail you with questions. I hope you're prepared for it, but we are going to be back around the break. Just a few words from our sponsors at Red Riot Games, and we'll be back with Kozmic. The Instant Speed Podcast is brought to you by Red Riot Games, my favorite place to play Flesh and Blood. Not only will Steve and Matt dig deep to find you that foil copy of Red Surging Strike that you really want, but they'll offer it to you at the best price around. If you've already got set up on singles, Red Riot Game also offers a wide variety of sweet playmats featuring all of your favorite heroes, including everyone's newest favorite, Lexi Livewire. You can help out the Instant Speed Podcast by checking out Red Riot Games through the link in the description. All right, so this is a little bit of a stop the presses kind of moment, and I don't know how the producer is going to stitch this together, essentially, because as soon as we finished recording yesterday, which was Monday, today is Tuesday, we got word through official channels and such that bans occurred regarding Chane, and specifically Seeds of Agony and, I guess, Duskblade as well. But more importantly is the fact that we went through all this discussion about banning and how to rein in Chane and statistics surrounding that and Living Legends points, and ultimately that all went moot. So in the editing process, there's going to be part of our previous conversation, and that's why we're wearing different clothing here. And I kind of preface this at the beginning of the news portion of this podcast. But Maddie, the problem now is that they have essentially taken the whole situation of Living Legend and came out and said, listen, this is not necessarily always going to be a solution. It's more of a way to pay homage to a hero who has performed so well in the time. And frankly, I mean, the way that they discussed these bans coming through, they have really published a little bit of a more than just a mea culpa situation where it's like, hey, we did bad here. In fact, one of them, when they're talking about Duskblade, they open it up with, we made a mistake. Like, that was literally what they said. So let's dive into these bans. And your initial impression last night when it comes through that Seeds of Agony in all of its colors and way, shapes, forms, and facets is now banned in Blitz and in CC.
Yeah, and the other thing to add in too is, right, it got tucked away, and I didn't notice it until today when I read the article again. At the very bottom, it says, like, there's another ban and restriction update planned for December. So it's really weird that we get from this Living Legend status to, okay, well, wait a minute, now we might actually just ban cards, that become problematic, which is good and bad, but definitely weakens up the hope of the Living Legend status and like a deck being fine until then. But I gotta say, and this is gonna be hopefully not a hot take, but I guess it is. I 100% believe that Seeds was the wrong card to ban for Chane. How do you feel about? Are you think it was on the money, or do you think it's a bit of a miss as well?
Well, I like what they talked about, because if you go into the article in depth, they discuss the reason why Seeds was initially, put in there. Because if we look at what the Nationals format is, right? It's 3 rounds of CC, 3 rounds of limited, and 3 rounds of CC again. And the way that they discuss it is the fact that given that COVID has essentially just been this very vicious turbulence when it comes to keeping anything smooth, in terms of just a competitive scene in general, they were looking to have all this wrapped up, all these Nationals, all this stuff wrapped up during the Monarch release. So they had more of a design space, set aside for the limited, and seeds being an integral part into Chane limited. And if you want to, they knew that Chane was going to be good in CC, but they wanted to create a situation where they needed cards that were going to help certain decks in the limited process. And, in their description, they really kind of, I don't want to say it's not their fault. COVID is obviously not their fault, and they can't prognosticate in terms of how these things are going to unroll, what can get canceled, what can get postponed. So in terms of what they banned and what they didn't, I'm not a good enough Chane player, nor am I good enough at the game to really say this is the problem and this is not. That's why I have you guys on the show, because you guys are a lot smarter than I am. But I just feel like this was a situation where they had a tough down that maybe they realized what we discussed earlier, that, despite the fact that this deck is absolutely whooping ass at like high octane levels, and it's only got 400 Living Legends points, we cannot let this sort of continue to either dominate, or we cannot let it happen where this kind of deck is just going to, create problems maybe in a Monarch block related, or an initial, a wave one, a first year, I don't know how you call it, but like that first block of cards, if there's a tournament in that, Chane would kind of dominate. So I'm curious to see what is the card that you feel should have been targeted here?
And so I definitely agree with, like, going back to their point, like they didn't want to have Chane be, 50% of the Nationals field. So I think the timing for it is okay, but my issue with hitting seeds in particular is that it really strips away Chane's identity, because no longer is it just we take out 9. And by the way, let's to also say that's 9 cards that's coming out of the deck. Like, that's no small number. It was like, it's just seeds being banned. It's just 1 card. Well, it's actually 9. That's a huge factor for, one, your blood debt threshold, which is very, very important for Change, heart and soul of his character design, hero design, but also Eclipse. Like, as someone who's played a lot of Chane, as someone who's played a lot of Inverted Existence and trying to line that up with like Bounding Demigod, Seeds was pretty damn important for making sure that Eclipse gets resolved and that you're actually using in the right matchups. And without that, yes, Chane's going to evolve, Chane's going to look a little bit differently, but you really hurt a lot of the core identity of Chane by hitting Seeds. Bounding Demigod gets a lot harder. Riftbind basically just says, well, it's got to be Howl or bust. And it feels really bad. So they hinted at it, and I kind of wish they would have maybe put the scope on it a little bit more. I would have liked to have seen an Unhallowed Rites, because then it brings in the control discussion. Like, first and foremost, I think it should have been Unhallowed Rites, because then you target the control/fatigue side of it, where they can't just keep looping Howl of Beyonds and Seeds to the bottom of the deck. I think that definitely lets you target one side of it. But going beyond that, think about things like Riftbind, right? If we're going to have an issue where it's like, the Riftbinds are too strong, just hit yellows, right? It like still give them maybe red so they can still have that like identity for it, but hit a combination of yellow Seeds and Unhallowed. And I think that would have been a better mix of it, because you just hit far too much by just blanket saying, okay, Seeds has got to go. Because, even thinking about this from the next level, that automatically screws up your Nebula Blade turns, which was an important part of the Chane match, where you'd start with Seeds, swing with, Shackle, swing with Nebula Blade from 4, and then try to play out and pressure your opponent a couple different ways. So it does so much that it hurts the Chane build that we're going to, you're automatically going to have to drop down below 50% blood debt, which is a horrible spot to be in. But all that aside, I do want to stress, I've seen a lot of comments, I've seen a lot of people talking about it. Chane is still going to be a good spot. Like, it's still going to be an okay deck. I'm not going to say it's going to be the best performer, but it's not going to be Azalea tier, as I think a lot of people have said around it so far, because you have to, like, full stop, Chane still cheats in Flesh and Blood. He still has a second hand. He still is the hero that, above the rest of them, has a free go again on demand. And those two aspects, just from a design standpoint, is very, very strong in Flesh and Blood. And heaven help us if the supplemental set comes around and they give us a cheap blood debt card again, right back to the moon with Chane. So I think they're not completely wrong in saying that Chane is going to march along to his Living Legend status. I think it's going to take a little bit more work to get there. But at the end of the day, the Seeds ban, in my opinion, was 100% wrong. But he's still going to march on. It's still going to be a strong contender, because he cheats. That's the only way to say it. Chane is a cheater for what he does from a design perspective.
there's a couple things I want to touch upon here. Number one is the fact that I think you're completely right. Is that there's this mantra of overreaction to a degree where you're either on one end of the spectrum or you're not. Either something is, there's no. I don't believe that for the most part people can just digest a nerf as being an adequate nerf. Now, obviously, this might fall on either side, but it's not the fact that it's not like you're going from a private jet to the freaking luggage hold of an airplane. You're kind of going from the private jet to like premium economy, or the private jet to first class or something like that. You're not getting dumped with like all the, the livestock in the back of the 747 or something like that. Like, that's not what's happening here. So all the people who are thinking that it's just going to be completely garbo and not playable, well, there's still a new sets to come through. And yes, I completely agree that you're not just banning one card, you're banning essentially 3 cards, which you can carry 3 copies of. And I figured that in a game where you have multiple copies of a particular card that carry different pitch values and different strengths along with them, that there was kind of a little bit of latitude for the developers to just go ahead and say, well, we can actually ban a card, but a version of it to give access. So you're not exactly cutting them off entirely. It's kind of like, you're at a bar and they're calling last call, but they say like, okay, last call, but you can order 2 drinks, kind of thing like that. So that's not so bad. So possibly a mixed opportunity there. Now, they did leave a little bit of leeway in their release, saying that will they ever revisit and unban cards? It's something that they said is completely possible, where they might go back and revisit. So to your point, they might actually go back and maybe reopen up certain colors of seeds and maybe reban certain colors of other cards to just kind of balance it out, so that a little bit of the heart and soul of the deck itself still exists, but perhaps down the line, it's kind of a pick and choose. That, we're going to take away your red version of this, but we're going to give back your blue and yellow version of this. So it's not all that bad and such. And I think that's fine. I mean, I think that there's definitely room for it there.
I think we could have definitely seen, into that regard, I think we could have seen blue seeds not get hit, because it's one of those things that it's still going to be harder to trigger, like Bounty Demigon and Ursa, like, sure. But it still gives you that blood debt. And again, my biggest issue with all this goes back to just Eclipse being abysmal to try to play now. So you already lose so much of that avenue of a game for Chane to play, that now it says he's got to go. Maybe we play the Tremor of whatever it's called again. That's the attack for 6 for 1, or 1 for 6. But the thing I want to say, at the end of the day, he's still the best Art of War deck. It's still, you have a blood debt attack, you're going to banish, you're going to get to draw the extra cards out of it, and you still get to use that card. So, Chane still has the best access to Enlightened Strike, Command and Conquer, and Art of War. And we know those to be some of the most powerful cards in the game right now. So I think Chane still has some room to be explored. I'll be honest, it's not me that's going to waste time on it, because there's new heroes and there's new things to be excited about. Right. But I really want to be clear, like, don't give up on Chane just yet. I know it's a tough pill to swallow right now, but he was, a little bit overpowered. We had to bring him back in line, but people who stick with Chane, I think, will still be rewarded. Not the same threshold that we've seen, obviously, in Vegas in the 40 whatever percent it was again for conversion, but I think Chane will still have a very solid, middle ground tier that he'll fall into.
It kind of feels akin to the fact, like, if you banned Flick Flack from like a Control Katsu, right? Like, it's just a lot of things fall apart, and a lot of the actual heart and soul and ability, the deck might just kind of sputter out. That said, Duskbane is the other one that has kind of bit the bullet before it even hit the ground. So that's kind of interesting as well. We've seen that in other card games, and it's kind of a point of, to me, it's funny where, you look at it, you're like, okay, you printed it and you released it, and people in their testing phases, and, that's part of the digital platform now, is a lot of things like Magic, and they get to, like a Magic Arena players get to play with the new cards typically a week before everyone else does. And a lot of the times within that week, things get busted real fast. And Duskbane is a card that they opened up with in their explanation, say, we effed up here. We legitimately messed up. This was a late developed card that we threw in, didn't get play tested as much, but we have seen in late playtests that this is a card that by the end of a game has 10 counters on it. That's obscene. And I think that nipping this in the bud, as odd as it may seem for a card to be printed, not even available yet, to be bought the old-fashioned way, like buying a case or buying a box or buying a single. Not having it, it seems like it's potentially a stain on the developer. How do you feel about cards that get banned before they're sort of released to the public?
It depends on how it goes, right? So it's a question of, do I think it was going to get hit in a month or a year, right? Whatever that timeline would have looked like. And in my personal opinion, it would have gotten hit in a lot sooner. So in that regard, I'm okay with it. You put yourself in a position where players, hey, I got a first edition non-foil. I got one myself, but you create a situation where players aren't rushing to buy that first edition cold foil if they want it. Because they want to get for nationals and they like the shiny, right? Or even just a non-foil still being like 20, 25 bucks, right? You kind of cut off that feels bad early before the set is really, yes, we had pre-releases, but that doesn't count, right before the set is more available. So you kind of cut out that feels bad and from players having wasted that money. And honestly, it's Runeblade, right? There's enough weapons. It's not like it's a major loss there. It does feel bad from a play standpoint and try to get the testing in, but I think overall it's okay. And I'm glad that they did it sooner rather than later, because I did see that card getting nerfed or in the case just getting straight out banned, right? It is available in Blitz. I guess we will clear up on that. It is still available to everyone in Blitz. So if you have a cold foil version, have at it. But yeah, that card was not sticking around. It would have had to, gotten hit at some point. Maybe they had read it to, I don't know. I don't think you fix that card. I think you just, you ban it and you move on.
And that's where they're going. And now the last thing we want to touch upon is the fact that they really did go dig deep into their justification for these bans. How do you feel about a developer that really goes in and gets you into the nitty gritty? Is this a situation where maybe they're just, giving away, not want to say giving away too much information because everyone likes transparency, but is this the approach that should be followed by other developers and card gamers card game designers? Because in reality, a lot of the times what we see out there is just the fact that it's like literally a 2-sentence thing. It's like, yeah, it was good, it was bad, it was amazing, a lot of people played it, it was overpowered, and frankly, you guys broke it. But when in reality, any card that comes out, they should prepare for this. So this new wave of mea culpa of here's basically a mini essay as to how, why, and where we're going with it. Is that the new template for developers to address problematic cards?
I would say absolutely. Obviously, for those that have been playing the game for a while, the hitting a ban without being a living legend is a really bad optics for LSS. But I think once you get past that initial shock of it and how they handled it, especially what history would say how other companies have handled it. I mean, no shocker here, Wizards, right? It's been really bad about this. LSS handled it with class. They were very transparent. And they did a really good job at communicating with the player base why they needed to tackle it. So I think it's a lot short term. It hurts a lot. There's no other way to say. I think it definitely burned a lot of people. I would see some people, getting out of the game if they weren't that invested into it already. But I think long term and that knowing that we have another ban list kind of around date for it, I think it's a very wise move by LSS and definitely helps set up the future in terms of what we can expect from a communication standpoint. And also, of course, because we have a date, when to expect the next bans, if there is one. Yeah. So good job on LSS for that overall.
December 14th, 2021. That's the next wave of bans. We'll see what comes out, if anything, possibly. It might not even occur. It might just be a response to something that is obviously broken in Tales of Aria, but nothing has essentially come out yet. But who knows? All right, it's time to go wide with Kozmic as we go again on a series of questions. We are prepared to just riddle them with all the nitty-gritty. Now, Kozmic, this one's going to be a short answer. Go ahead, you can elaborate on them for sure, but these are kind of rapid fire, so keep your answers short if possible. Are you ready to go again?
Let's do it.
All right, number one is, what is the best hero from Tales of Aria?
I'm going to go with Lexi. I think the ice strategy can be really strong, and I think Channel Frigid Lake is just an insane card.
All right, now we dug into this a little bit before, but just remind us here: will Chane hit Living Legend?
I want to say yes, but we'll see what happens with the meta. I think it would be a good thing for him to hit Living Legend for sure.
All right, you dig into a lot of statistics. We all love you for it. You have been really, really helpful with that, but there are some out there that might be misleading. What do you feel is a very misleading statistic?
It's got to be win rates. I think people hyper-focus on pure win rate stats without knowing the bigger story, and it's easily one of the most leading ones from all the card games I've covered in the past.
All right. Now, you got to tell us, because I've been seeing some rumblings and such privately as well as on your Twitter. Why do you hate limited format, Kozmic?
So I'm coming around, and I will elaborate on this one a little bit more. I think what it's been is I just didn't like Magic from a limited format, and it really grinded my uh, possible appreciation for it. And I think beyond that, I like classic constructed formats because there is a confined puzzle that you can figure out. Like, going into the match what to expect, and you can play around it a little bit better than you can in a limited format. So I've always appreciated a more classic constructed style of format.
See, and that's the difference on my side is the fact that I loved limited formats because you don't know what you're up against. And yeah, someone might pull a bomb or this or that, but it's always a puzzle and there's always a situation. So you and I kind of like and hate the format for the exact same reason, which I find fascinating. All right, so you have been a hero again for just promoting the game and locally as well as online, and to the whole Flesh and Blood world and the community. But if there's a new player and they need a piece of advice, what is a piece of advice that you can offer to a new Flesh and Blood player?
Absolutely. Definitely check with your locals. Make sure you're getting a group together. But the number one thing is going to be pick a hero and just stick with it. You need to learn the basics of the game, the hero in and out, and you will learn the game so much quicker if you just dedicate yourself to one. That would definitely be the number one place I would start.
I have to also add on to that. That is a great piece of advice as well. And that is what has really helped me improve as well, is focusing on one hero and just making sure that I have them down pat before I go and venture into others. The other, which I have hammered into the show's producer over and over and over again, which is read the damn cards. Just because it's not in your deck does not mean it's not important. So when someone's playing a card and you do not know what it does, take the time to read it and understand it, because it will probably haunt you back in the future. That is something I always tell in any card game. Read the damn card. Okay. Speaking of cards, what is your most hated Flesh and Blood card?
So this one might be a little bit ironic, but Chane. I absolutely hate he's done to the format, and I think that anyone from a stat side or even just metagame perspective can very clearly see why that's going to be my most hated card.
Okay, but if there was no heroes, I might be putting you on the spot over here right now, but if there was no heroes, if you had to take heroes out of the pool, I'll even throw in equipment on this one. I'll give you equipment, but I got to take out heroes. Is there a card that is a non-hero that might bother you more than others?
Yep, and this is going to be a little bit speculative, but I've already thought about this as well, is actually, and that you can kind of tell what kind of player I am, but Channel Lake Frigid. For the same reason I don't like Chane, I can see Channel Lake Frigid being another card that is just going to warp the meta. And maybe people run more energy potions, right? Whatever that answer looks like. But if Channel Lake Frigid becomes so popular that people are having to kind of restructure their entire decks because of one hero in the meta, not to the same degree as Chane, but I think that's still a kind of unhealthy approach to it. So I'm going to be jamming 3 of the card all day, every day, and twice on Sunday. I'll tell you that. I'll tell everybody that right now. It's very much a me card, but I quickly think that's going to be my most hated card in Flesh and Blood.
It's funny because the card like that does not get Living Legend status points, right? So it's not like the more it wins and the more it gets played, it's eventually going to get banned. That's going to be a flat-out decision and a community outcry reaction, perhaps, by LSS to decide what to do with that card. But if your prediction is correct, and I am on board with you with that, I believe that card can have a significant impact. In my opinion, it's an auto-include in any deck that runs a predominantly ice. That said, sleeper heroes or cards, past or present, what do you got? What is the secret spice that not many people are aware of right now?
Believe it or not, I'm gonna go with Kano. And I've been trying to play the deck myself. I just love wizards and like other RPGs and stuff like that. People don't respect Arcane Barrier, and it's one of those things like we've seen. To use another Magic comparison, Infect in Magic. It was one of those decks that unless you bring the sideboard for it, they're just gonna run away with an event. And look, I get it. Your first 50 games with Kano, you're going to lose. That's just how it is. Like, it's a very complex, and there's a lot of different lines to learn with that hero. But I promise you, if you put in the time for it, it's very strong. You have to dodge Prism. That's like the one thing that kind of sucks about it. But Kano will absolutely steal games if you put in the time and if you make a right meta call at the right time. So I think Kano absolutely is one that needs to be for only the strongest of hearts, but Kano absolutely should be played more.
Big shout out to the dude at one of my most recent CC events who brought Kano, And given the fact that this game being paper only is very much a local meta kind of thing, where nobody played Kano in the local meta, where nobody brought arcane protection, and this guy just trounced his way because it was hilarious. And that's basically what it was. And everybody the next time around at least had the gloves on or something to sort of at least give themselves an out here. That said, what does Flesh and Blood look like in 5 years for you?
That is something I'm going to wait until 2022 to really have a good understanding of. Look, they've already done a great job surviving 2 years in COVID, but I think the big turning point is going to be next year with their organized play and seeing what direction that goes in. There's a lot of talk on Magic Twitter, a lot of people coming over. There's a lot of interest. If they can do next year well, and knock on wood that the health environment's a little bit better, I think they have a very absolutely bright future, because the organized play, the system that they want to do, is absolutely everything that the Magic community and other card game communities have been looking for. So I got to say, I think it's a very, very positive future for Flesh and Blood if 2022 goes well for them.
And I hope it does as well. And there's a lot on the horizon, as we all have discussed. There's still a lot happening in this year that is yet to essentially unravel. There's a lot of callings, national championships, which you yourself will be participating in. And I do wish you luck, Kozmic. Again, you are an asset to the community. You are a gem, not so much hidden, but for those who perhaps have you still hidden, who have not discovered you yet, where can people consume your delicious content?
I am Kozmic Plays, Twitter, YouTube, once we get that up and running, and then also on Twitch, which Twitch is not as much card games as of late, just more of a hangout and good vibes. But yep, Kozmic Plays on all socials and other content sites that you're looking forward to.
Well, sincerely, I do appreciate you being on the Instant Speed podcast, man. You are a great friend and somebody who has, I wish you a lot of luck moving forward with the national championships. We are going to touch base in the future. Again, we talk about cards all day long, every day, all day. So you and I will chat, but for everyone else, I do highly recommend you go take a look at Matt Kozmor, a.k.a. Kozmic, all of his content, which he has said that revival of the YouTube channel is happening. I'm holding you to that, buddy. It's happening, right?
Yeah, very soon. I just have to actually get some games recorded here, and then they'll be up there.
Yeah, well, you can't have content without unless you record something. But that said, that's it for the Instant Speed podcast. We want to thank our sponsors at Red Riot Games. Go check them out at redriotgames.ca. There's a link in the description of this video, friends. Go click that and help out the podcast. It's the best way to do it. Again, for me here, don't forget you're not losing if you're learning, friends. So keep your chin up and keep playing cards. I'll talk to you soon. This is Flake. Again, thank you so much. Adios.